welcome to Georgia Detours. My name is Deborah Pierre. Today we've traveled outside of the city to our very own backyard's fast track. I'm talking about Road Atlanta in Braselton, Georgia. Now it's pretty loud and we're gonna head down to the peaks and we're gonna get a first-hand look at some of the exquisite cars here at Road Atlanta.
In 1969, David Sawyer, Earl Walker, and Arthur Montgomery carved out Road Atlanta from a 750-acre plot in Hall County.
They actually brought the first Can-Am race to here at Road Atlanta in 1970. It was going to be at a different venue, so they had to get the track ready pretty quickly so it could be here for the September event.
In just 6 months, a farmer's field was turned into a world-class motorsports facility.
That was huge for this area. It was a huge turnout in 1970. And since then, we've just blossomed. This track has grown. It's seen some hard times, but it's seen some really good times too.
Road Atlanta is a 2.5-mile track with 12 turns on 750 acres in northeast Georgia's rolling hills.
Well, Road Atlanta is one of the historic racetracks in North America. A lot of new tracks, they boast they have 15, 20 corners per lap, but it's only a short track and it never gets going. Here, there's long straights, tight corners. It's a really technical track. It was built in the 70s. It's a proper racetrack where you actually feel like you're going somewhere. You come through the front straight, up the hill, along the straight, through the Essex, down out into the countryside. Come back, it's challenging because of the elevation change. There's a lot of challenging corners with blind crests, which means you come over the crest of the hill, you don't know if the track is going left or right, so it takes a bit of courage. It's a special challenge and it has a wonderful history.
Dr. Panos, a well-respected figure in Braselton, saw the potential in Road Atlanta. In 1996, Dr. Panos purchased the track and immediately started making improvements.
Dr. Panos was a wonderful figure to help kind of get us started. He's been a huge impact on Road Atlanta. It had gone through a recent hard time and he kind of breathed new life into it. He actually built a new main paddock that most of the teams run out of for our big spectator events. He did so much for this area as far as bringing new commerce here because of the track being here. So he's had a huge impact on it. And in 2012, he sold the track to NASCAR. So we're actually a NASCAR-owned facility now. And now NASCAR's kind of taken over and we have access to all their resources and they've been nothing but great.
Road Atlanta has events scheduled year-round. Among them are Drift Atlanta, the Petit Le Mans, and the Classic Motorsports Mitty.
This is the Mitty, it's the Walter Mitty Challenge. It's been going on, this is the 38th annual event. Started with a small Jaguar club, they did a car show, then they did the track event.
Recognized as one of the most prestigious racing events for vintage cars, the Mitty brings legendary machines back to the track.
Well, the Mitty, of course, comes from the great short story about Walter Mitty, who wanted to live life to its fullest, and of course that became a movie just recently. This event in particular, it caters to all sorts of things. We have lots of on-track racing, from Formula cars, Formula One, sports cars, cars from the 50s and 60s, all the way through stock cars.
Resurrecting past glories, vintage racing brings living, breathing history to a modern audience.
It's evolved into what we have now with over 360 cars.
Resurrecting past glories, vintage racing brings living, breathing history to a modern audience.
It's a vintage racing event, so all the cars you see on track are actual vintage race cars that have been restored to their original specifications.
This year we had record ticket sales. We actually sold out of the VIP tickets and we filled up a couple of our race groups. There's also a lot of stuff going on in the infield. You can do touring laps around the racetrack, you can do hot laps around the skid pad, but it's a full weekend.
We've got new spectator events coming, so we're hoping to keep blossoming, keep growing.
So the next time you're looking for a fun detour for the whole family, look no further than Road Atlanta in Brazelton, Georgia, where kids under 12 are free to every event.
Hi, my name is Deborah Pierre and welcome to Georgia Detours. Today we've taken a trip to Howard Finster's Paradise Gardens in Summerville, Georgia. We're taking a look at how the 59-year-old recycled different artifacts. He was an engineer and he also was an iconic folk pottery artist.
The garden was started as a roadside park in the 1960s. Howard was known for soliciting his friends, neighbors, children, and eventually his grandchildren to help construct the now famous Paradise Garden.
He started all this after the age of 59, when most people are getting ready to retire. That's the one thing that people say most when they come is they can't believe the scope of it, the magnitude of how big everything is.
Before his death in 2001, the Man of Visions, as he liked to call himself, was one of the most widely known American self-taught artists, producing over 46,000 pieces of art.
Folk art is usually self-taught artists. Howard is known as the grandfather of folk art here in the South, and he had no formal training as far as the fine arts goes. But when we talk about folk art, it's usually self-taught artists that are kind of outside. Well, he preached for years and years and years. He was a Baptist preacher, and God inspired him to create the garden.
One day, Finster was applying paint to a refurbished bicycle. He saw that a human face had formed in a smudge of paint on his fingertip. He then heard a voice tell him to paint sacred art. From that day until his death, Finster began crafting sermon-laden art pieces.
Howard Finster only had a 6th grade education. He created a world of art outside and inside as well. He was a man of faith and he loved to preach and incorporate his love of God throughout all of his artwork. It's everywhere.
He never threw anything away. He would incorporate bottles, marbles, broken glasses, teacups, anything that he could find that people would give to him, he would use in some fashion here in the garden. We try to work a lot with the local schools. In the museum space, that's where we have the walls designated for student work or visiting artist work. I have kids at my school say, Miss Abdu, I can't make this or I can't do that, and I'll say, wait a minute, stop and think about what Howard did at 59, so nothing's impossible. We have Finster Festival on May 30th and 31st going on here at the Garden as well as in downtown Somerville and around the depot. But we host the Chamber of Commerce here. We have a lot of business meetings. People come here for weddings, just all sorts of events the Garden is open for. We're becoming an artistic community, and there's always been this vibrancy here in the county as far as arts goes. We're showing how the arts play such a major role in everyday life around Chattooga County. We're getting people involved, we're getting students out. There's just all sorts of events going on here.
So the next time you're looking to be inspired, take a detour to Chattooga County and let the Garden speak to you as it did to Howard.
We were taking a drive through North Georgia and we took a detour to find Folk Pottery Museum. Director Chris Brooks invited us inside to take a deeper look. So let's go.
Showcasing one of the South's premier grassroots art forms, the Folk Pottery Museum of Northeast Georgia explores the historical importance and changing role of Southern folk pottery.
Well, the museum traces the folk potters here in Northeast Georgia, starting about 1820. My background is history and historical archaeology, and I was excavating a site near Madison, Georgia, and recovered pieces of green stoneware that I'd never seen before. Potters were looking for a way to make stoneware without using salt in the glaze, and they developed a glazing system using local clays and lime and wood ashes, which is an alkaline mixture, and that's where the term alkaline glaze comes from. So this greenish glazed pottery that you see throughout the museum is really what makes Southern pottery Southern.
The Folk Pottery Museum of Northeast Georgia is one of just a handful of such museums focusing solely on folk pottery.
This tradition is a tradition of stoneware that began in the Edgefield district of South Carolina. That type of glazing was only done from South Carolina to Texas up into North Carolina and Tennessee until about the 1890s. Then I discovered that there were still potters up here working in Northeast Georgia, so I tried to meet as many of the potters as I could, learn about the tradition and learn how they made their wares. Every culture has some kind of anthropomorphic clay vessel. The face jug is very special in this part of Georgia. A lot of people have questions about where face jugs came from. It's a phenomenon that's found worldwide. In the South, we believe that perhaps it was introduced by slaves in Edgefield who had recently come from Africa and may have made these small face jugs that would hold only a half pint to a pint of liquid, perhaps as ceremonial items. They were making them for practitioners of some type of ceremony. Dave Drake is an interesting figure because he was a slave potter in Edgefield, South Carolina, but he had worked at a newspaper and so was taught to read and write, which was very unusual for the time period. He would sign his pieces and date them, and so they're highly sought after today because of the amount of information that we have on Dave Drake himself. This particular jar is signed with the initials LM up here on the rim, and LM stands for Lewis Miles. Lewis Miles was the pottery owner and the owner of Dave at the time that this pot was made. This writing up here is actually the handwriting of Dave himself. We look at the potters the way a folklorist would. You're either born into a family of folk potters, or you apprentice with one of those families, like the Metters family, or you work in the gardenware business. Those potters that work with them are being trained by folk potters and learn the traditions of the folk craft and can be considered folk potters themselves. So 3 ways that we identify people.
Georgia's pottery is a nationally known tradition. The Metters family was honored in 1978 in a Smithsonian documentary based on their pottery.
In the 1960s and 70s, when the Smithsonian came and filmed the Metters family here in White County, and they actually filmed Lanier Metters making a face jug. We have a number of pieces by Lanier, kind of trace his development as a folk artist. And then some of the face jugs were taken to Washington, D.C. and sold at the Smithsonian, which led to the interest in folk pottery here in Northeast Georgia and the preservation of the craft eventually.
So the next time you're looking for a weekend excursion, take a detour to the North Georgia mountains and discover the Folk Pottery Museum for yourself.